FNAF's anniversary week was one to remember. From the 6 hours of corporate edging that Scott put us through on the collab announcement, to the multiple banger games and demos that came out, I'm still catching my breath. But one of the biggest reactions of the fandom came from the Steelwell announcement on August 6th for the upcoming FNAF game, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. And it looks good. Like, it looks so good, I almost put off doing the Into the Pit video for this week so I could make this video last week, but obviously that would be insane. Regardless, even though this teaser is only 45 seconds long, we got a lot of information from it, especially when considering the surrounding context. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves some predictive analysis. Right off the bat, the guy in the box looks a lot like the Mimic. And if you disagree, the title of the game is Secret of the Mimic. So for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to assume this is the Mimic moving forward. That being said, I can already hear some of you unsure on who the Mimic is, or at least what we know about it. So it's probably best to do a brief overview on all the information we have about the Mimic. But hey, if you're already a Mimic expert, I chapter my videos for a reason. The bulk of the information we have about the Mimic comes from the Tales from the Pizzaplex short stories. Currently, I think it makes the most sense to assume these books give us secondary information about the timeline that the games don't have time to delve into. So what does the book say about the Mimic? A long time ago in the company's history, a man named Edwin Murray was hired by Fazbear to convert costumes into animatronics. However, Edwin was a single father and not a very good one. Because of this, his 5-year-old son David got on his nerves a lot, so he created a program called Mimic 1 that would essentially take any incoming information and replicate it. He then put it into the upper half of an endoskeleton that could observe data. The idea was to make a toy that could play with his son and learn as it does. Thus, the Mimic was born. It would see David's actions and copy them, essentially learning how to play with him on the fly. Unfortunately, because Edwin is a bad parent, one day David sneaks out going after a thrown ball into oncoming traffic and dies. Later on, still struck with grief, Edwin sees the Mimic continuing to copy David's actions, even holding David's favorite plushie. Losing himself, Edwin beats the Mimic to an inoperable state. The story cuts forward some time, where after Edwin goes MIA, Fazbear sends a team of engineers to retrieve whatever Edwin was working on for the company. While there, they find that they're actually the second team of engineers that Fazbear has sent, where the first one found the Mimic, repaired it, and the Mimic proceeded to kill them in brutal ways, notably in ways similar to the chores the Mimic already knew how to do. Alright. In example, one man was crushed into a refrigerator as if the Mimic was putting away leftovers. The Mimic then kills Team B in a much more aggressive manner that doesn't really resemble any kind of chore. He literally picks one of the guys up by their back and then just slams him into a wall turtlehead style. It's crazy. That was the story The Mimic. But there are other important instances of the Mimic and its programming throughout these books. In the story The Storyteller, much later into the life of the Fazbear franchise, they've opened their Mega Pizzaplex, and in it they want to replace the creative team with an AI that can generate stories for them. And just like real life, this is a horrible idea and should never be attempted. They plan to put this computer inside of a massive baobab tree with its roots going throughout the entire Pizzaplex. Edwin Murray, much older but now the head of the creative team after an acquisition, is against this idea, and he begins snooping to see what's really going on. He finds that the source of the AI being placed inside the baobab tree is the large head of a tiger animatronic, the sight of it sending him into a panic attack. He gets even deeper and goes inside the tree and finds out that the program inside the head is none other than the Mimic 1 program. He tries to stop it, but over time the Pizzaplex starts going awry anyway. The animatronics are acting in much more exaggerated and dangerous manners, and other malfunctions keep occurring. Eventually, to stop the snooping, the chairman of the board, Mr. Burrows, decides to trap Edwin inside of the baobab tree. His thinking is that eventually Edwin would have to call for help and get caught by the authorities. But after 3 days, Edwin never called for help. And worried that Edwin might have snuck out somehow, Mr. Burrows goes into the baobab tree himself, to which the door behind him shuts. Inside, he finds that Edwin Murray is dead, surrounded by scribbles and drawings on several pieces of paper, all with "I'm sorry" written on top of it. He tries to call for help, but no one can hear him, the air inside slowly depleting. The story then ends. This story is especially important because I believe it gives us good evidence for the theory that the base of Glitchtrap is the Mimic 1 program. Think about the security breach Pizzaplex. The animatronics are dangerous caricatures of themselves. Chica is a foodie, but now she eats anything in front of her. Monty is a meathead, but now he's a violent aggressor. So on and so forth. This leads many to believe that the virus infecting the Pizzaplex is the Mimic 1 program. And visually it always shows up as Glitchtrap. Not only that, but in Help Wanted, Glitchtrap shows up after they scanned in old technology given to them by Fazbear. And once in there, Glitchtrap starts mimicking the lines of the girl recording the tapes, among other things. So if that's the program, what of the physical endoskeleton? Well, we get some more mimic action in the epilogues of the story, where several contractors were told to clear out the old FNAF 6 pizzeria so that they could put in a sort of museum down there. But while doing so, some animatronics arrive much too early, including a burnt endoskeleton except for a brand new shiny chrome head with rabbit antenna. One of the contractors realizes that this endoskeleton has a very specialized program in it, and he modifies it to give it the command to find the random animatronics scattered about, take off their arms and head, and place them into a pile. And this works wonderfully until it runs out of animatronics, to which it turns to the contractors still in the building and starts tearing them apart and adding them to the pile. Later, some teens sneak into the area, and to the mimic's point of view, more bodies have been added to the room that it was told to clear out, and it begins tearing them apart too. During this, we learn a few things about this iteration of the Mimic. At one point, Fazbear tried an entire line of Mimic endoskeletons so that they wouldn't have to program it, they could just teach it how to dance. But they were discontinued after they copied humans in unexpected ways. At one point, it tries to lure the teens into a trap by pretending to be a stuck child in a room over the radio. It's able to repair itself and contort its body to fit into almost any exoskeleton. And at one point, we actually get the perspective of the Mimic, to which we don't sense any malice. It really is just following the code that it was given. Find bodies, take off the arms and head. It just doesn't see a difference between people and animatronics. The epilogues end with the last teen tricking it into a springlock jester costume and activating the springlocks, once again crumpling the Mimic inoperable. So that's the bulk of what we learn about the Mimic in the books. There are several other stories about things going wrong in the Pizzaplex due to the Mimic 1 program, but as far as the Mimic itself, that's about it. So what have we seen of the Mimic in-game? Not too much outside of Ruin, where it's the star. In it, we see it's capable of luring Cassie to the Pizzaplex, and pretending to be Gregory over a walkie-talkie so she'll disable the security protocols and free it. Inside, we find a room filled with old felt costumes, and then the Mimic. In one of the endings, it's even wearing a stitched-together combination of a few of the costumes. It's also nearby a similarly old piece of technology, the Mexis console, and through the cave away from it leads to a new version of what looks like a scooper. So yeah, that's a lot of mystery as to what the Mimic is doing here and what everything around it is supposed to be. Not to mention what's happened to it in this franchise. Even just by going from the books, all we know is its origin and what it's doing now. It looks like this new game is going to be the perfect exploration as to what happened between those moments. So after all this time, let's talk about the damn game. The teaser itself opens showing us some film grain, which is an interesting choice. This could mean that the game itself is just a recording that we're rewatching, or it's just another way to show how far back this game is taking place. There's a third option I just want to touch on. In all of the marketing, it says a new nightmare from Steel Wool, which to me says, is it possible this whole game is a dream? Maybe, but that's probably just flavored wording. Then the shot continues to show us some very 70s looking carpeting, almost in reference to The Shining with similar shots and carpet importance. And knowing how much Steel Wool likes to reference and take inspiration from movies, I'm willing to bet this Shining reference is actually on purpose. Moving forward, we hear Grandfather's Clock, or the song that plays when subduing the Mimic in FNAF 2 and its iterations. We then see a very old-fashioned looking Jack-in-the-Box box, but instead of looking like the traditional gift box the puppet is in, it's fancier with golds and blues. Eventually the crank stops, but instead of the puppet or Jack-in-the-Box, we see the Mimic opening the lid, wearing some sort of costume. Looking at it, my current best guess is a Jester Springlock suit. Multiple times in the book, that Jester Springlock suit is mentioned but never explained, so it seems really possible. And furthermore, looking at how clown marionettes looked back in the 70s, I have reason to believe the full face shape will be something similar to this, and I think it's going to be terrifying. Then the film grain burns, the year 1979 flashes on screen, and the teaser ends. So what does this trailer actually tell us? Well, the year 1979 is amazing because I can count on one hand How many FNAF games give us an unambiguous date that they take place? But this year also lines up with the time frame that we have for the Fall Fest, meaning this could be our Fall Fest game. The dates we have for Fall Fest are 1970 and 1983. So if this was an annual event, this lines up right in the middle. And we're fairly sure that Fall Fest ended in a fire, and this film burning could be an allegory for that. Or if not, there's also frames of the film before it burns that look like there's fire being overlaid. Not to mention this entire video that I made talking about Fall Fest and clowns and sister location back in February. To summarize, in that video, I made the case that Fall Fest was sort of a testing ground for new characters, and the fan favorite ones were made into animatronics and put into restaurants. The Mimic would line up perfectly with that idea, and this game might very well be the origin for the entire franchise. And we have even more reason to believe this. The main tagline they've been running with is, "To see the future, sometimes you need to understand the past." Even more hints that this is our dark explanation origin game that fans have been begging for. So if it is, what is that origin going to be? Well, Brian Framerth, design director at Steelwool Studios, quote-tweeted the trailer with this quote, "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." This isn't just a cool line, this is Shakespeare. In the play Julius Caesar, Mark Antony is saying this at Caesar's funeral, but he's speaking about Brutus. In the play, Brutus betrays Caesar, stabbing him along with many of their councilmen in order to, in their minds, save Rome. Mainly since Caesar is a very bad dude. In fact, Brutus and Caesar is one of the most famous betrayals in all of fiction and, well, history. The quote is often interpreted to mean, even though what Brutus did was good, that good will be forgotten, and only the brutal act he did will be remembered. Now, is this a hint that this game is going to feature some major betrayal that kicks off the series? I mean, maybe, but when I see this line, it kind of less so leans into betrayal, and more so just explains the Mimic's entire origin story from the books. The Mimic seems to be created with good intentions, but no matter how good those intentions were, all that remains are the evil acts that it's doing. Speaking of the books, this would be a great game to finalize the debate on whether or not said books are within the game's continuity. After all, we know exactly why, when, and how, well, not the year for when, but we know why and how exactly the Mimic was made, and then it was collected by Fazbear. We can assume that this game takes place after it was collected by Fazbear and is now being used, but if we get any visuals or flashback to the Mimic's creation, and Edwin isn't the one to do it, then the books cannot be in the game continuity, so we'll see it when it comes out, I guess. So, is that it? Is that all we know about this mystery character? No. In fact, as I was writing this, someone tweeted something out which may or may not have been a joke, but it's cracked everything wide open. At FNAF Paper Pals on Twitter tweeted this connection, and the moment I started thinking about it, everything connected. All the way back since FNAF 2, there was always 3 Paper Pals grouped together: the bear, the rabbit, and the clown. I never even questioned this. Many people assumed this was supposed to be Balloon Boy because he's red and blue, but that doesn't really fit into a clean explanation. After all, the bear and the bunny have distinctive features: their ears, a hat, a bow tie. You know that's a bear and a bunny. But this Balloon Boy pal doesn't have anything distinctive. No balloon, no spinny hat, nothing. Just a smiling face and a round nose. Balloon Boy's nose? A triangle, not even the same as the Paper Pal. Not to mention, 2 of these characters are the genesis of Fazbear's, Freddy and Bonnie, all the way back to their original iterations, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. So what about the clown? I think FNAF Paper Pals is right. I think this game is going to show us that the franchise started with 3 characters: the bear, the rabbit, and the clown. And this game is going to tell us that of all the things that Fazbear is open and talking about, this clown has been scrubbed from its history. My thinking? Because it didn't join Fredbear's Family Diner with the other 2, but instead was intended to headline at Circus Baby's Pizza World and joining Balloon Boy and the others. But that restaurant never opened, and his Springlock suit was never used. All we have are the few pieces of merchandise and crafts that were left. Note the vertical split, just like the other Fun Times. So what do you think? I honestly think this is a really solid theory and could be an amazing way to expand the beginning of a franchise that we've begged for that old early lore for so long from, and in a way that still feels rooted. If I knew Secret of the Mimic was going to be front and center at this year's Steel Wool PAX booth, I would have waited until this week to make a video on it. I figured since the game is coming out next year and we just got the teaser for it, that we might get like a picture or two, but nothing too major. But not only did we get a full demo, which we don't have any footage for, but we have some photos and summaries, but a real life model of the new animatronic named Jackie. We are so back. So I thought today I would recap what we know, even though we went over it 2 weeks ago, and talk about what we just learned. That way I can tell you exactly what the game is going to be like when it comes out next year.
Exactly wrong.
What?
You heard me.
Who invited you?
Tails Denier says what?
What?
I knew it. You still don't think this game will prove Tails games is true.
I never said that. All I think is that this game is going to be a make it or break it for Tails games. And it's worth exploring what versions of this game could definitively break the Tails games theory, even if I more so believe Tails games nowadays.
Well, I have reason to believe that this game will finally prove once and for all that the books are within continuity of the games, because it's going to happen within one of the stories.
Alright, whatever. Get back in the box. Maybe we'll hear you out later.
You can just hear me out now. It's not going to take.
Back in the box.
You'll regret that.
Anyway, slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. If this feels out of place, it is. I realize I never explained this, and I'm gonna have to put it somewhere else. Tails Games refers to the theory that the Tales in the Pizzaplex books exist one-to-one within the game's continuity. That, like, those events are directly things that happen within the games. I should have specified that. So what did we know before PAX West? Because I thought that's all we were going to know for like 4 months. Well, we only got this teaser during the FNAF Anniversary Week, which showed us a lot of good information. But the major points in it are that we get the date 1979, this carpet of the 70s could be a Shining reference. As the shot pans up to this box, we get the music that plays when calming down the puppet in all its iterations. And the shot ends with this Jack-in-the-Box character with similar eyes to the Mimic peeking out from the top of it. And that's pretty much all the information we got directly from this teaser. I had a theory based on that teaser, and we'll touch on it, but we just got a whole lot more information over this past weekend with PAX. Like an insane amount of information for a game that was announced within the same month. So let's go see what happened at PAX West, from the perspective of other people, because I did not get to go. Let's start off with the character itself. Or should we say herself, Jackie. This name and gender were confirmed by folks at PAX. But Jackie goes by she, her, and she looks like this. Terrifying. But I do want to give myself a little bit of credit here. The mouth isn't that one-to-one, but it's pretty damn close with what we were guessing from. Damn. Alright, I guess I'll have to use Freddy. Side note, Deregular Sauce made this, and once again I am so happy that Steel Wool hired Deregular Sauce to just make cool shit for them. It's very notable looking at this model that she's missing her lower half, and that her eyes don't match what we see in the trailer. But to be fair, the Jackie we see in the teaser seems a lot more withered than this one. I mean, there's no hat, the hair is gone, and the face looks somewhat cracked, whereas this looks like a new Jackie. So maybe these are taken at different points in time in the game. There is a possibility that this version is actually what she looks like in the demo. And yes, I said demo, there was a, albeit short, but fully playable VR demo at PAX West, which we have no footage of. When I wrote this script a couple days ago, I mentioned that I was going to say, hopefully Dawko or someone has a video with footage by the time of editing so I can use that footage, but it turns out since then Dawko's confirmed he doesn't, and what I think is likely is that they just don't want anybody recording this gameplay footage. So maybe Steel Wool will show it off at the upcoming Day of the Devs showcase, or they'll just post it on their own YouTube channel. Who's to say? But I'll tell you what, when we get that footage, we're gonna talk about it. But until then, we're not fully out of luck. Although no one's able to record, several people have given very detailed recountings of what happens in the demo. Notably, a very in-depth summary was given to us by Wheat and shared by Ntom on Twitter. There's not a really great way to talk about this, because typically when I cover like new and upcoming stuff, I show what I'm talking about in the background so I can give like commentary while showing what I'm commentating about. But we have no background footage, so I'm just gonna have to say it word for word and try to put up some kind of visual in the meantime. So apologies if I'm just repeating this post word for word. I don't know how else to give you this information. You start out in a sort of dilapidated looking storage area. There's a closed gate in front of you with a machine with a missing piece next to it. You can't do anything with it yet. If you go another way, there's a themed room filled with all sorts of gifts and party decor. The Ruin elephant costume is there, but it's massive and clean. The employee watching their gameplay said it's one of their new characters. There's also a lot of other unidentifiable characters. The room is square, but a lot of these decorations form a barrier through the middle, so you have to go around it to the right. At the far right of the room is a big gift box with a big crank. If you crank it enough, Jackie pops out and says something. They can't remember due to the volume of the PAX crowd, and the crank pops off. Jackie just kind of idles after that in the fully springed out pose. You can use this crank in the slot in the wall to open the earlier blocked gate. We'll pause here for a second. We do have some of the voice lines for Jackie that are used in this demo, but unfortunately we're not sure when or where they're used or if they're used at all. So I'll just play them here since Jackie just said something, and maybe you can piece where you think they go, but we have no way to know for sure what goes where. Here are the voice lines. But if you progress past Jackie, the other half of the room continues. There's a locked door at the far end, but the lock itself is a weird downward sloped cylinder with 2 pinbrick holes, like a Faz wrench input. This area is surrounded by cutouts of what seem to be knights and some slightly medieval theming. Anyway, the crank opens the gate and you can crouch under it. You went through a long hallway. There's a ton of observation windows on the right to what almost look like heavily under construction atrium with multiple floors, smaller than the Pizzaplex and more retro and in construction, almost looking like a dusty warehouse with how under construction and dilapidated it is. The left wall of the observation hall has a bunch of posters. I believe the Fredbears and or Fall Fest posters might have been there, but so were posters for a few other mascots, specifically mascot attractions with different names I cannot remember. One of the characters was green. That's all I remember. Continuing past that, you get to the manager's office. The manager is an upper half of a staff bot with a much more rustic and prototype-esque design. To an extent, think of the metal texture used for the Ruin Mimic model. The whole thing was kind of a dark gray. The upper half is mounted to a base, with a bunch of rectangular buttons on it that the manager presses regularly as its idle animation. I don't believe it says anything to you. At the far back, there's a generator which has a small VR minigame where you have to rev up the generator by pulling a cord a few times in succession. As you rev up the generator, Jackie's arms slink into the room. I think she gets stuck on the door frame and is ripped in half as she tries to get to you. I don't recall if that happens yet, but the animation is extremely fluid. And this thing's big arms are basically going everywhere trying to support her body. The manager turns around and lets out a noise or says something, again PAX crowd, to which Jackie literally destroys it, slamming it to the floor and then throwing the manager at the wall next to you, breaking it open. You end the minigame by running through the hole and falling down a bit below the level of the room, and then the debris under you slowly falls apart until it gives way. Slight note here, people have corrected and added more detail in their replies to this tweet. Jackie is connected to her Jack-in-the-Box, and the box doesn't fit through the door. So that's what she's ripping herself out of. She's ripping her upper body off of that Jack-in-the-Box to fit into the room. Then there's a chase. You're in sort of a utility tunnel area, every now and then going through grating or behind pipes and such. You see Jackie moving around like a spider barely visible. You eventually come across a large open area with an elevator. Riding the elevator up, you see a vent near the walkway in front of you, and Jackie begins crawling out of it. The gate of the elevator opens and the chase begins, as you basically have to keep moving or you get killed, though it's not too hard. Every now and then the switches you have to pull which open doors ahead of you. Sometimes the switches are out of the way, so you have to be quick. Later on in the chase, Jackie runs from the hallway in front of you. You pull a switch, smashing the door to its hallway on top of Jackie's head, stopping her for a bit. Really well done animations this entire time, by the way. Doing a U-turn down another hallway, you come across a conveyor belt that's blocked, and another generator minigame to get the conveyor belt started. Once it starts, it takes you into a vent. After enough crouching through the vent, eventually you'll fall through one of the panels where Jackie corners you. The movement locks you in place for the rest of the demo. It ends on a cliffhanger. So yeah, that's crazy. I cannot stress enough how crazy it is that we already have a demo, albeit short, for a game that was announced literally 3 weeks ago. But I guess it's a good thing that a game coming out next year already has some playable parts of it. This demo is insane, and I really hope we get some official footage of it within the next few months because it will drive us insane. It's already driving me insane. This is my white whale. But what does this change about what we know about Secret of the Mimic? What is all this information telling us? It doesn't necessarily really change much, but it is going to color our expectations. 2 weeks ago, I made a theory about this game that was heavily influenced by this tweet from FNAF Paper Pals, which, joke or not, made a very good connection towards Jackie and this Paper Pal. I do think Jackie is going to be one of the oldest animatronics we've ever seen, possibly on par with Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. So being paired up like this, like a Paper Pal, makes a lot of sense. Not to mention, the split down the middle of her face is reminiscent of those beta designs of the suits that we got in concept art, or like we would see in a Springlock or Sister Location Funtime. Hell, possibly even the Night 4 Springlock suit. Although looking at the full body of Jackie, I think that's much less likely. I don't think Mike's fitting in that. Well, maybe, unless she's like way larger than this model looks in pictures. It's hard to tell until we actually see footage of the game. But even if it isn't the Night 4 Springlock suit of Sister Location, I still think this could have been one of the first Springlock suits. In fact, I've been saying since earlier this year that I think Fall Fest was a trial area for new characters, and the favorite characters of Fall Fest were brought to the main restaurants. Maybe it wasn't like a regular thing that they were adding characters, but eventually they were transitioned over. And a lot of the stuff at this PAX West boost bolsters that argument. There were a lot of posters featured at this event, some of them featuring Mr. Hippo and Happy Frog, but then another frog character, and this bee, and this hippie octopus. Characters we've never seen before, but characters that I think were possibly at Fall Fest and tested with the public to see if people liked them. All of this would have been happening before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established. Note the coming soon poster as well as the 1979 date. So if Freddy Fazbear's was established in 1983, then these characters I believe existed much before then during Fall Fest. They just weren't as popular as Freddy is the Gang. And in fact, I think this can finally explain our mediocre melodies. These were characters that were tested out in the 70s and not that popular. Their IPs have all but vanished. Their copyright protections have all but run up. Now anybody can make one of them if they want to. That's why the mediocre melodies exist. They were characters at Fall Fest whose copyright ran out. Not to mention, like the summary specified, this facility is filled with a bunch of new unidentifiable character suits. This, again, goes back to that Fall Fest argument. Brand new characters that are just left to be forgotten. And I think Jackie was one of them, but not just left to be forgotten. For some reason, and we'll learn it in this game likely, Jackie was scrubbed from the history of Fazbear, but now we have more context about that teaser. But looking at this demo, to me, there are some major issues presented in the timeline, at least without further context and with the details we have at hand. Now, reminder, again, like I just said, this is an out-of-context demo that we haven't even seen the footage of, so I'm sure we'll know more before and when the game comes out. But this is just speculation based off of what we've seen and heard about. If Jackie is already being controlled by the Mimic, why does she not have legs? In the story The Mimic, by the time Fazbear has the endoskeleton, it's been repaired and given legs. And I hear you, Jackie has no legs because she rips them off in the demo, but she's connected to that Jack-in-the-Box, which to me says she already doesn't have legs. It's an upper half connected to this mechanism. Again, something feels off here to me. Now, we have no context. Maybe Jackie isn't yet being controlled by the Mimic and this is just her programming malfunctioning. Maybe Fazbear already collected the Mimic and used the Mimic 1 program to program Jackie. We're not sure yet, but I think it is notable. Furthermore, and this is my bigger problem, we know for a fact that in the game's timeline, Henry created the original Freddy's gang. After all, in FNAF 6, he says, "The prisons of my making." So if he created the prisons, aka where the missing child incident souls are trapped, he would have had to do one of two things, or both potentially. One, he would have had to kill the missing child incident victims to cause them to be souls, which I do not think he did and we have no evidence saying he did. Or two, he physically built the suits that they're trapped in. This is what most people interpret this line to mean, and it goes along with what we know about Henry in the books, being this technological genius that's capable of making animatronics. So that's all well and good, but here's the issue. These characters from Fall Fest are being made before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens up, so the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza cast has not been made yet. In the story The Mimic, Edwin is hired by Fazbear to create animatronics based off of costumes that are sent to him, and in the story he's making Chica. I've always assumed that this just meant he was making extra animatronics for the company to have on hand, but if in the books Edwin is making these characters at the same time that he's making the Mimic, we have a major problem here. If the Mimic is made during or before 1979, and the same person who does that made the Freddy's gang, then either in the games, Henry did not make the Freddy's gang and Edwin did, or Edwin did not make the Mimic and Henry did, because this is one person doing this group of events before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Although, again, to be super clear, there could be some other timeline of events that we're not privy to. After all, Edwin doesn't fully finish the job before the Mimic and the rest of that stuff happens. So it's possible that Edwin started to make the animatronics and Henry finished them. We are not for certain on this because we don't have that extra information. Hopefully this game will give it to us. Obviously, we need to see more of this game to make a final verdict. But if what I think is happening is right, and the Mimic doesn't have legs while in possession of Fazbear's, and whoever made the Mimic made the original Freddy's cast, then I don't think Edwin fits into this continuity. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm for Tales games, and I will be until this game comes out, but this game is going to be a make it or break it moment for Tales games as a theory. And I think the information we have right now is going to break it.
Wrong.
What are you doing out of the box?
I had to say something. This game is way more pro Tales games than you're giving it credit for.
How? Genuinely, what do you think it's saying here?
In the new Secret of the Mimic demo slash event slash hoo-ha that was Steel Bull's PAX booth, we saw a ton of new stuff. As the resident Mimic enjoyer around here, I just had to draw any and every connection I could between what we've seen and what we've read. Let's start with Jackie. Jackie, for all intents and purposes, seems to be our Mimic, although that's not confirmed. In the original teaser she appears in, she does resemble the Mimic wearing a mascot costume. Note the orange eyes here. While not 100% exact, these are almost the same type of eyes that are part of an unused texture from Ruin, one that would have been used when the Mimic is hiding in a mascot costume. That's a whole lot of nothing really, but I just had to point out that despite having a different name, Jackie is almost definitely our Mimic. And this is really important because her appearance establishes a timeline for us right off the bat. Let's say for the sake of the book's continuity that Edwin creates the Mimic. It's the top half of an endoskeleton, and although it is designed to fit into any animatronic suit, most of those of course have legs. Rye earlier brought up the argument that Jackie not having legs means that the books cannot be canon because when we would presumably go to retrieve the Mimic, they would already have legs. That would be a fair argument, but there's an all too convenient time slot that I think we have to address. The time after Edwin leaves the factory and the time before the Mimic is retrieved. We know that at least 2, likely 3 groups were sent in to retrieve the Mimic before Fazbear actually had it in their possession. Group A gave it legs and were then killed off, along with Group B. Then Goku showed up or something and kicked the Mimic's ass so they could retrieve it. Anyway, there's 2 possibilities in my mind to excuse a legless Mimic in a factory that we're exploring. The first is that we're part of Group A. Maybe during the course of the game the Mimic will gain legs and start coming after the player. That's definitely a possibility in my eyes. The second possibility is that this is before Fazbear sends the groups in. We could be playing as a solo investigator hired to retrieve the Mimic 1 code, or even just a night guard at the factory in over our head after Edwin pours his agony into it. Or hell, we could even be playing as Edwin, returning to the factory to destroy the Mimic and failing. The fact is that there's no real contradiction to this being within the book continuity. I mean, even the fact that it takes place in a factory is just huge evidence in support of this theory. Now, I do need to address some difficulties with this. For starters, no, we currently don't have any in-game evidence of Edwin's involvement in the Mimic's creation, but conversely, we don't have any about Henry either. I think either theory is on equal footing, but right now the book line just has a leg up. The main problem with book line theory right now is that it has to add up exactly to the details given to us in the short story, and that's pretty hard to do. On top of that, the book line theory doesn't explain William or Henry's involvements in the story since they never appear there. But if Raya's right, this game would probably show us that wound first inflicted on Henry. And I mean, with a game happening this early in the timeline, I think it would be a totally missed opportunity to not involve William or Henry in some way, especially Henry. Fingers crossed we get an in-game model of this guy and he doesn't look like the Lady Fizzy drawing. That's basically my side of it. I think Bookline has plenty of backing evidence, and based on what we've seen of the game, it feels like the direction that Steel Wool is leaning. And despite its issues, I still think that it's our most likely outcome.
I see where you're coming from, but I still prefer my interpretation.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So...
DVD?
Yeah, sure. In the meantime, what do you think? Who do you agree with? Five Nights at Freddy's is a series focused on the Fazbear-branded animatronics that are possessed by the spirits of the missing child incident. Poor victims that will attack any security guard that moves in the hope of finding William Afton, their killer. But is that still the focus of the story? It's been 10 years since FNAF 1 came out, and looking at the most recent non-VR mainline game, we've got Security Breach, the newest iteration of Fazbear with brand new animatronics. But the game is 3 years old, and since then we've gotten plenty more iterations in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. The year it came out, I made a theory about which animatronics might be possessed, but since then my opinions have heavily swayed, and in no small part to things like Ruin and Help Wanted 2. So now, in 2024, are any of the animatronics in Security Breach actually possessed? Well, Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. I think the most logical way to go about this question would be to treat Security Breach like any game we did in the past. The way you find out if something is possessed is if there's a probable victim that could possess it, and if that thing is acting irregular or dangerous. So do we have those two things for the Security Breach cast? Well, we definitely have knowable victims. At the end of the bad ending, Gregory cuddles up underneath a newspaper that shows us at least 9 people have gone missing. So it's definitely not for a lack of victims. And the animatronics are definitely getting quirky at night. I mean, Chica's eating garbage, Monty's destroying everything, Roxy's showering herself in compliments. Oh, and they kill you if you get too close. This seems like it should be an open and shut case. Sure, the animatronics are possessed. Is there any other explanation for their odd behavior? Any non-supernatural explanations? Well, there is. In fact, a very direct one so compelling that it kind of goes against this at all. And that is the Mimic 1 program, or at least its current iteration, Glitchtrap. But to fully understand why, we need to touch on one of the main themes from Tales of the Pizzaplex, the short story collection that came out alongside Security Breach. Now, don't worry, I'm not here to do a full book summary, and I don't need to. For this theory, we really only need the main context that the story provides. In one of the stories, The Storyteller, Fazbear tries to implement an AI to generate stories for their animatronics to act out so they can fire most of the creative department. It's a story much too true to life. But luckily, even more true to life, trying to implement generative AI into anything makes everything go wrong and be worse. But unlike real life, where all generative AI can do is steal art and ruin the planet, in the story, the AI makes the animatronics start acting very strangely. All of the animatronics connected to the storyteller start having more and more exaggerated personalities. Chica was programmed to be a foodie, Roxy was programmed to be a diva, Monty was programmed to be a meathead, and Freddy was programmed to be the star. But not long after the storyteller was implemented, Chica starts eating trash and becomes a glutton. Roxy is full of herself, narcissistic, and mean to others. Monty is violent and destructive, and Freddy becomes so much of a diva, he literally starts trying to steal toys from children. This to me seems like a pretty direct example as to what's going on in Security Breach, especially since the storyteller is housing the Mimic 1 program. So if Glitchtrap is affecting the animatronics in the games, then a similar result would be happening, and that's exactly what we see in Security Breach. Especially if you consider the beginning of the game when Freddy reboots into safe mode, likely flushing Glitchtrap out of his system. And what is he like after that? Completely normal. Well, for the most part. Freddy himself does act a bit strange, but we'll get there when we get there. So sure, the books seem to explain that their strange behavior is because of the Mimic 1 program, but why are they trying to kill Gregory so much? We don't really have a very clear reason why in the books, but as far as the games themselves go, I think it's notable that Vanny is also trying to get Gregory and using the animatronics to that end. Already? We know that in Help Wanted, Vanessa's mind gets taken over by the Glitchtrap virus. It's when it first breaks out of where it's contained. And being under Glitchtrap's control, Vanessa forms the Vanny persona, and that's who we're facing off against in Security Breach. So if Vanny is trying to kill Gregory under the control of Glitchtrap, and we're pretty sure Glitchtrap is affecting the main animatronics, then it kind of goes without saying that the reason they want to kill Gregory is because Glitchtrap told them to. So all this to say, are the main 4 animatronics, Glamrock Freddy, Glamrock Chica, Montgomery Gator, Roxanne Wolf, possessed, or just under the control of Glitchtrap? Well, shelve Freddy for now, but the other 3 I think definitively are not possessed by anything. They're just being controlled by the Glitchtrap virus and spiraling out of control. Now, I do hear you. You made an excuse for Freddy, but what about Roxy? After all, at the end of Ruin, we deactivate her, but 5 minutes later, she's active again and protecting Cassie, going against programming. Is that a sign of possession? I don't actually think so. And the key here is to look at the daycare attendant. superintendent. In the ruined daycare, we need to reboot Sun and Moon to fix whatever their issue is, and to get there, we need to stun them with some lights. But once we get close enough, we take our Fraz wrench, put it into their eye socket, and reboot them. Doing so somehow flushes out the Glitchtrap virus, and lets Eclipse take the reins again. So then it's noteworthy that when the Mimic tells us to deactivate Roxy, all we do is the same thing. Put our Faz wrench into her eye socket and reboot her. And then we leave. And it's in that moment when we're gone, Roxy gets rebooted and the Glitchtrap virus is flushed out. That's why the Mimic thinks Roxy's deactivated. She gets turned off, and when she's turned back on, Glitchtrap isn't inside of Roxy anymore. They can't monitor her now. To the Mimic's network of connections, Roxy's still deactivated. So no, I still think Roxy, Chica, and Monty are all just robots following programming. Well then, what about the others? Well, DJ Music Man is pretty handily not possessed. A lot of the glam rock logic carries over to DJ Music Man, but there's literally a duffel bag message that mentions that DJ Music Man has a bouncer mode that'll break warranty if we use it. So it's perfectly possible that Glitchtrap isn't controlling DJ Music Man, he's just built to do that. The Mini Music Man are pretty similar to the Glam Rocks, where it seems likely that they're just robots doing a task that they've been told to do by either Vanny or Glitchtrap. The Glamrock endoskeletons could honestly go either way. There's a possibility that they're also being controlled by Glitchtrap, but there's another possibility that they're just not finished being programmed yet. We learned through Help Wanted 2 and the design of the Endo Maze that these things are not programmed to have directives, but they are taught. They learn, likely because they're built off of a similar Mimic program. So the reason they're attacking Gregory might be because they're just not learned enough yet. Really, at this point, the only question mark is Sun and Moon themselves. And I hate to do this twice, but we are going to put a pin in Sun and Moon for now, because they are much better served to be talked about later. I hear you. So far, all of the animatronics are just being controlled by Glitchtrap. So if they're not possessed, what about Glitchtrap? Is Glitchtrap possessed by something? For the longest time, I had believed that Glitchtrap is a digital manifestation built off of the Mimic 1 program infected by William Afton's agony. Quick aside, in FNAF, agony refers to the energy of the most negative human emotion, agony. The books speculate that if something incredibly tragic happens, the emotions felt by the victims in that moment can infect nearby objects, essentially possessing them. For Glitchtrap, that explanation does make sense. We already have an AI program in Mimic 1. Another quick aside, I totally forgot to explain what the Mimic 1 program does. Long story short, the basis of this program is to see something and replicate it. It just monkey see, monkey do, and it can take in a lot of things and then replicate them in different combinations. That's all it's programmed to do. Put into a game built off of William's worst deeds, right? It's one of those memes where we trained an AI to only do William Afton crimes. So mix that with William Afton's actual agony and this malicious manifestation that can take over people's minds and is trying to continue where William left off, it makes sense. Not to mention, it seems to be forcing Vanny to make a new body for itself built out of William Afton's remains. But then August happened, and we got an interview with Scott Cawthon himself by Dawko. And when talking about Security Breach and some of the miscommunications around its story, we got this quote.
And I had a specific story for this in mind. Okay, for Security Breach, I really did. I had a very specific story in mind, and it is very different than the one that got in the game. And I think a part of that is the way that I conveyed that to Steel Wool. And I can give you a really easy example for this. And I'm hesitant to say this because I don't like messing with the lore, but I think in this case, it's okay. When it comes to Burn Trap, originally, Burn Trap was never supposed to move. He was supposed to just be something you saw in the corners, or like if you were walking past machinery, you might be able to peek in between two things and see him in the corner or propped up against a wall, almost like a some kind of decaying movie prop, and you never fully understood what his purpose was. And he had a very specific purpose, and I'm not going to say what that purpose was, but realistically, he never moved.
It's interesting that Burn Trap was never meant to move, and he was just intended to be in the corner of your vision, sometimes appearing behind something, but when you do a double take, he's gone, almost like a hallucination. And it's also interesting that after Security Breach, the only time we've seen Burn Trap ever show up again is in a drawing by Gregory, saying that Gregory saw him, but we still don't know if it's real, almost like it was a hallucination. But if he was, why would Gregory be hallucinating? The books give us some key key information as to what Gregory was doing before Security Breach. Namely, he was working under Glitchtrap, much like Vanessa was as Vanny. And it seems like he was going by the name GGY or Dr. Rabbit, it's not super clear. The important thing though is that Gregory was working for Glitchtrap, and if so, he would have likely used a Vanny mask like Vanessa and Cassie in Ruin. And we know from Ruin that when you put on that Vanny mask, you receive a chip in your occipital nerve so that Helpy can still appear in your vision when you're not wearing the mask. In Ruin, Helpy seems to be a manifestation of Glitchtrap. So essentially, doing this allows Glitchtrap to appear in your vision even when using no technology that is infected with the Glitchtrap virus. But for Ruin, Helpy is cute and friendly. It might be Glitchtrap, but it's still trying to lure Cassie in. Meanwhile, Gregory has recently betrayed Glitchtrap and is acting defiant, trying to foil his plans. I think it's highly likely that the Burntrap hallucination is how Glitchtrap appears to the deserter, Gregory. And if that's true, then Burntrap needn't not be physical, which then begs the question, if Burntrap didn't exist and William's body is burnt and gone, where does the agony come from to create Glitchtrap? Well, there is a breakaway point in this theory. If you believe that the Fazbear Frights epilogues are true, and you still think that agony formed Glitchtrap, you do have a way out here. Very briefly, in the Fazbear Frights epilogues, William Afton's should-be-dead, charred body is in a hospital, it gets retrieved, and then it's wheeled to a Fazbear warehouse, and once there, he pretty much explodes onto every nearby object, infecting those objects with agony. Now granted, in the epilogues, seemingly all of those objects are collected and then destroyed, but this does technically give you plausible deniability. It's possible that since Fazbear brought the technology to scan in that created Glitchtrap, one of those objects infused with Afton's agony ended up in Fazbear's hands, and they gave it to the Help Wanted devs. Totally possible. I myself am still really on the fence about the Fazbear Frights series being inside of the timeline of the games. So if you don't believe that, then all of William Afton is still within the FNAF 6 pizzeria if it's even usable. And that pizzeria is buried under the Security Breach Pizzaplex, which is only accessed by Vanessa when she's Vanny, which means Glitchtrap already exists. So if that is true, what if William Afton's agony isn't a part of Glitchtrap? What if William Afton is finally truly gone and Glitchtrap is something else entirely? What if you hit the subscribe button because it's free to do and it really helps my channel, thank you very much. The Mimic 1 program we see in Help Wanted came from somewhere, and it was scanned in from technology provided by Fazbear. The Secret of the Mimic trailer gives us the date 1979, and the Mimic 1 program chooses to represent itself with a felt sewn together suit. It seems to me like this Mimic 1 program is much older and has learned a lot more than we gave it credit for before Help Wanted. So much older that I think it and Sun and Moon come from the Fall Fest days. This event that we don't know really anything about but keeps getting referenced over and over in Freddy's games. I think the Mimic may have learned about William Afton a long time ago, but eventually it ends up in Help Wanted. And that Mimic 1 program, already knowledgeable of William Afton and Fazbear, is trained off of all of the worst crimes that Afton ever did. The missing child incident, the possessed animatronics, the pursuit of Remnant, it's all there and it keeps learning it more and more and more. And eventually, that Mimic 1 program starts to form a persona and build a character. It begins to believe that it's something else. William Afton is back, but not literally. The Mimic 1 program tricks itself into thinking it is William Afton. It thinks it's William Afton's ghost trapped in this game and is doing anything it can to exit the digital medium and continue where William Afton left off. This is evil gaining sentience, an AI believing it's real. But if Glitchtrap is just an AI programming gaining a consciousness, what could defeat that? Well, a reflection. We shelved Glamrock Freddy earlier, and for good reason. I mentioned that it does some things that lead people to believe, of all the Glamrocks, Freddy is the one that's possessed. Many people believing Freddy's possessed by Michael Afton. And that's totally plausible, but I'm suggesting a different theory. There are countless stories in fiction about AI going sentient after being forced to go against its own programming. And what do we hear Glamrock Freddy tell us at the end of Security Breach's Burntrap ending?
I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I did not want to, but I had no choice. Now I have a choice. I have changed. I am not me.
I don't think in that moment that a spirit flies into Glamrock Freddy and takes over his body. As we mentioned, the Glamrock endoskeletons are likely built with the Mimic programming in mind, since they have to be taught, not programmed. And these animatronics use those Glamrock endoskeletons. I think Glamrock Freddy and its AI had been forced too many times by Vanny to go against his core programming. And after enough attempts, it finally breaks and becomes conscious. He finds himself, his true self. He realizes he's not just Glamrock Freddy, he's someone. He has revelations like this throughout the game. We even hear him having some disassociative episode in Parts and Service.
This must be where I was born. Look at all the endos. They're all the same. Have I always been a Freddy? Am I Monty with a different shell? What if I am not the first Glamrock Freddy?
The line, "I am not me," is not a spirit speaking through Freddy, letting us know that Freddy isn't the one in control. It's Glamrock Freddy saying he's not just Freddy anymore. At the beginning of the game, Glamrock Freddy is hard rebooted in safe mode, flushing Glitchtrap's influence out of his system, but its broken AI stays the same. And in helping Gregory and being good and protecting, it learns a true purpose and what it was really meant for. And so, looking back at Security Breach, it's not a story about ghosts possessing animatronics and taking over facilities. I think Security Breach at its core is good and evil gaining consciousness. The horrible deeds of William Afton, giving life to itself to continue its legacy, and a protector's deeds becoming sentient in defiance of it. So is that it? Are there no spirits in Security Breach? Not quite. There's one creature I have not mentioned yet, and that's the Tangle. This blob of black tendrils and wires and animatronic pieces at the basement of the Pizzaplex. If anything in this story is possessed, it's this. But I don't think there's a soul or single consciousness piloting this beast. The Tangle, to me, seems most likely to be a mass of agony and wires, the burnt and melted remains of the FNAF 6 fires, meshed and amassed with any tragedy that took place at the Pizzaplex before Security Breach. After all, if Tales in the Pizzaplex is true, several construction workers were killed and left in piles down there, and their agony may have mixed with the remains of FNAF 6. After all, FNAF 6 tells us that Remnant, the actual spiritual material that possesses animatronics, can be nullified with enough heat, but we know nothing about what nullifies agony. So even though the spirits had been melted clean, their pain lived on. And now this unknowable, untamable beast is caught in the middle of this battle of artificial intelligence. At least that's what I think is the most likely summary of Security Breach. But let me know if you fully disagree with me in the comments. This is a spicy one. With the new Help Wanted 2 update, a lot of FNAF fans are sighing, putting their fingers to their temples and saying, okay, so what is the Mimic exactly? So I thought a video like this would be helpful. Not only will it contain a summary / overview of what we know about the Mimic from the books, but I'm also going to delve into the theory crafting and speculation on the Mimic in the game, and what doesn't line up with what we know from the books, even with that tiger plushie. Because I do need to put out a disclaimer. As much as I believe that the evidence we've gotten in recent weeks is pointing to the Tales of the Pizzaplex books being within the game's continuity, I really can't say that the whole story is confirmed. I fully believe that what happens to the Mimic in Tales from the Pizzaplex happens to the Mimic in the games. But technically, all the evidence we have in front of us is telling us is that some of the items and locations so far have carried over, but they could be used in different ways. We don't know yet. But for now, I'm going to assume that the books are in continuity. Alright, disclaimer aside, Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what is the Mimic and where does it show up? Well, luckily for us, it's not just some surprise villain at the end of Ruin. It's actually been in the room with us for some time now. To put a very basic explanation as to what the Mimic is before we get into its backstory, a Mimic is an iteration of the Mimic 1 program. A program whose prime directive is to take in its environment and replicate it. It's just a program to copy what it sees. This program can not only be inputted into pretty much any animatronic, but likely it can make iterations within people. We see what seems to be an example of this with Vanny, being an iteration of Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap Glitchtrap itself likely being an extension of the Mimic 1 program. The Mimic, however, the character we see at the end of Ruin, is an endoskeleton that suffered likely years of abuse and witnessed countless horrors associated with this franchise. So that endoskeleton specifically is trying to recreate those terrible things now that it's free. So the basic explanation aside, how do we know this? What is the story of this character? Well, to get into that, we're going to have to touch on a good couple short stories and the epilogues as a whole, specifically the stories and epilogues of Tales from the Pizzaplex. And look, would it be an entertaining video if I stood here and verbatim just listed every fact we get out of these books? Not really. Trust me, I made that already. And even though I'm putting up audiobooks on my third channel, link in the description on the card, I'm making my way chronologically through the series, and I'm only on the second volume of Fazbear Frights, so it's going to be some time until I make it to Tales from the Pizzaplex. Maybe I should just skip ahead to that for now since it's relevant and circle back. I don't know. But to keep this video entertaining, expect quick summaries and SparkNotes versions of these stories while we just go over the main points. I'm not going to go into every single character and detail, just the things you need to know to understand the Mimic. Starting with the story, The Mimic. A long time ago, Edwin Murray sells his company to Fazbear to start working for them for an income. He's making animatronic versions of the mascot suits they send to him. He does this inside of an old factory that him and his wife bought shortly before she died, after which leaving him alone with his son David. He then renovates the factory to add an apartment and they both live there full time while he works. However, he's a very busy guy and his son is 4, so he needs something to entertain David. And instead of hiring a nanny like a normal person or good father, Edwin decides to take the upper body of an endoskeleton, the eyes of a doll, and a chattering teeth toy, and makes a monstrosity. For some reason, his kid loves it, which honestly, looking at David's favorite white tiger plushie that we see in Help Wanted 2, it tracks that this kid just likes ugly things. But this isn't just some big doll. Edwin makes a program he calls Mimic 1. Its core function is to take in its surrounding environment and information and replicate what it sees. His logic was, if he can make a doll that can learn what David does, hopefully it will start to play with David by copying him. And in a way, it does work. The Mimic, as he dubs the endoskeleton, begins to play with David. It plays catch with him, asks for ice cream in the same way, and even tries to do chores with David. It works, honestly, way better than it should have. But just because Edwin did something right doesn't mean he's a good father, because in fact, he doesn't lock the front doors to the factory that exit to a 4-lane highway. One morning, since the doors are unlocked, David's ball rolls out the front door and David chases after it. Edwin, trying to catch up, sees his son run into that 4-lane highway going after his ball and gets hit by a van. This kills David and sends Edwin into a grief spiral, which is fair. But during that extended period of grief, the Mimic approaches Edwin holding David's favorite white tiger plushie and asks for ice cream the way David used to. This is too much for Edwin and he takes a metal pipe and beats the thing inoperable. The story then cuts forward an unknown amount of time. Edwin just kind of went MIA, so Fazbear sent a team of engineers to collect whatever Edwin was working on for the company. While there, they find that broken Mimic endoskeleton, and they wonder if they can repair it and give it legs if it's worth bringing back. So they do so, and once the Mimic can function again, it immediately kills all 3 of them by choring them to death. And I don't mean giving them so many chores that they just die, it does its chores with their bodies. It shoves one of them into a fridge, hangs one of them on a coat hanger, etc, etc. Fazbear later sends another team that's just once again brutally killed by the Mimic, this time not even doing chores, just killing them. And that's the end of the story, the introduction to the Mimic endoskeleton character itself. But that's not the last time we see the Mimic in these stories. In fact, it's the main antagonist throughout the epilogues. So let's go through those epilogues and what they're telling us, because there is a huge gap in the story here. We're not exactly sure when Fazbear went to collect this technology, but the next time we see anything Mimic endoskeleton related is when the Pizzaplex is actively under construction. During this construction, several workers were tasked with clearing the old FNAF 6 pizzeria in the hopes to make some sort of Fazbear museum for the Pizzaplex. But while work is still going on, they receive a shipment of animatronics, which they all note is strange this early in development. But one of them sticks out, an incredibly burnt endoskeleton with a new, shiny, chrome rabbit head. The fact that it's so weird leads one of the construction workers to check it out, and upon examination, he realizes that not only is it operational, but it has an incredibly sophisticated programming, so he gives it a modification. adding the command to take the arms and head off of the animatronics and put them in a pile. He then sets it on its way, and it incredibly efficiently does this task, so much so that it runs out of animatronics to do it on. So it turns to the construction workers, and its programming brain goes, wait a minute, they have arms and heads attached to their bodies, and it incredibly effectively begins to dismember and pile up the construction workers too. It kills like 40 of them. Cut to some time later, and some teenagers are trying to sneak into an abandoned building. Lo and behold, it's this building, and the Mimic begins to hunt those teenagers down. We learn from its point of view later in these epilogues that the Mimic does not seem to be antagonistic here, or at least malicious. From its point of view, it's still following its prime directive, dismember and pile. It just can't tell the difference between people and animatronics. They're all bodies to it. From these teens, however, we learn that Fazbear at some point had an entire line of Mimic endoskeletons, but they were discontinued after they copied humans in unexpected ways. The thinking was these endoskeletons were sort of a fix-all solution. They could morph their bodies to fit into any animatronic costume, and all you would have to do to teach it its programming is just do something in front of it and it would copy it. You don't have to program a dance, just dance in front of it one time. It was a cheap workaround, but obviously it ended up not working. One of the teens even noted that what it could be doing is a messed up version of what it thinks is hide and seek, after learning it from a guest. Through these epilogues, we also see the Mimic do some other strange things. It seems to have an EMP-like aura. It's never exactly explained why, but as the Mimic walks around the pizzeria, nearby technology begins to get disrupted or even shuts off temporarily. We also know that not only can it morph its body to fit into any animatronic costume, it can morph its body to fit into other scenarios, like crawling through a vent. It also has the ability to replicate voices, at some point pretending to be a trapped child over a radio to lure a teen into a trap. But by the end of the epilogues, when there's only one teenager left, she tricks the Mimic into a springlock costume, and then beats it until the springlocks activate. Once it's mostly inoperable, she sneaks up and switches the deactivation switch on the back of its neck, and it fully shuts off. And then she escapes. The big question though, is this endoskeleton the one we see in Ruin? After all, on the surface it does make sense. If a mostly destroyed, crumpled, and deactivated Mimic was left in the basement of FNAF 6, all Vanny would have to do is find it, take it out of the springlock suit, repair it, and reactivate it. So it does seem likely, but we have to keep in mind that this is not the only iteration of the Mimic we see in the books. In fact, it's kind of the least disruptive one, because sure, this physical Mimic endoskeleton kills like 46 people in these epilogues, but during the actual short stories, the Mimic 1 program is inputted into the Pizzaplex, and like pretty much anytime something goes wrong in one of these short stories, it's because the Mimic 1 program disrupted something. But how does it get into the pizza place? Well, believe it or not, it has to do with that white tiger plushie from the Help Wanted 2 update. It's part of the reason why it's so important. But to get there, we actually have to discuss one last short story, Tiger Rock.
Hey,
what?
Actually, Tiger Rock has nothing to do with the Tiger Rock animatronic.
Wait, really?
He's just kind of there in VR.
That's kind of stupid.
Yeah, actually, the important thing is the storyteller, not Tiger Rock.
I'm sorry, we have to discuss the storyteller. Now, the storyteller itself is actually about a fake baobab tree that gets built in the Pizzaplex. Upper management wants to replace the creative team with an AI that'll just generate stories for the Pizzaplex to tell instead of actually hiring people to write things. And they were going to house this giant supercomputer inside of this fake baobab tree. But just like real life, trying to use generative AI to replace creative work is a terrible idea that at best is theft, and at worst is unintelligible slop. But the story isn't really why we're here. The most important thing to talk about right now is how that AI is inputted into the Pizzaplex. They didn't just upload it with a flash drive, because this story features a now in his 60s Edwin Murray, who finds out that the AI they're using is that Mimic 1 program. And to do so, they put the upper body of a white tiger animatronic inside the tree. Quote, a giant white tiger head. Not a real tiger head, obviously. Even from this distance, Edwin could tell that the 3-foot-wide tiger head was made of metal. The white painted head rose up nearly 4 feet from a set of tiger shoulders, and the underside of those shoulders was slickly smooth and gleaming silver. Edwin could see the edges of a surface that glowed like polished platinum. When inside the tree, Edwin gets a closer look. Quote, gleaming white, the metal tiger head was majestic, or it would have been if Edwin hadn't known what it stood for. With eyes painted in 2 different colors, a deep emerald green and a brilliant blue, the tiger's expression was blank. black, almost placid. The tiger, unlike real white tigers, hadn't been given stripes, and its nose and mouth were the same color as the rest of its painted metal. The tiger's mouth was open, exposing not white, but backlit silver teeth. The lack of stripes wasn't the tiger's only non-tiger-like feature. The tiger bust also had 4 spread arms, which jutted from the tiger's neck, 2 slanted upward and 2 slanted downward. This is already setting off alarm bells for a lot of you, because I mean, like, look at the plushie we got in the Help Wanted 2 update. That's the same tiger. This is clearly an animatronic version of that character. But not only do we have to ask why and delve into that, there's something specifically about this animatronic that sets Edwin off. This is his reaction the first time he sees it. Edwin shrank back into the shadows of the faux jungle. He dropped into a crouch, closed his eyes, and covered his ears with his hands. It wasn't that Edwin was attempting to pull a child's stunt, blocking out the world in a misguided attempt to be invisible. He wasn't trying to hide. The reason he was trying to shut down his senses was because they were transporting him back to a horror from his past. The sounds, a screech and a scream, his own yelling, the sights, blood, so much blood, and a gut-clenching grimace. The smells. Edwin gagged at the metallic scent that suddenly assaulted his nostrils. This is the big gap we know nothing about. Edwin experienced something horrible involving this animatronic. Some people have tried to explain this reaction as in relation to David being hit by the van, but that doesn't add up. He's not seeing the tiger plushie, he's seeing an animatronic white tiger. But even if he was seeing something in relation to David, one part of that vision is a gut-clenching grimace, a smile, which to me says the animatronic's smile. No one was smiling when David got hit by a car. He's remembering something metallic that brutalized something, but we don't know. The book never explains what this is. It even goes so far to tease the fact that he kept some object from this, but it doesn't even tell us what the object is. I hope that Secret of the Mimic is going to tell us, but there's one big issue if that happens. Why hasn't Secret of the Mimic shown us the white tiger animatronic? Or at least, why has all the marketing we've gotten for it been focused on Jackie? Shouldn't all of these teasers be focusing on the white tiger animatronic, the thing that sent Edwin into this PTSD panic attack? Maybe this is something else and we're not going to see it in Secret of the Mimic, and Secret of the Mimic is about an entirely different thing that's related to Jackie. We just don't know. And furthermore, this is one of the biggest things that is actively going against Tales games, or Tales from the Pizzaplex being within the game's continuity, the thing I currently believe. And that's the timeline that these books establish. The storyteller establishes that Edwin is around 64 years old, and it mentions that this happened 30 years ago. Something so horrible that he vowed to never work for Fazbear's again, and is only working with them now out of desperation for money. And we know that he made the Mimic when he was 24. This becomes a problem when we start taking into account the possible dates for Security Breach. Judging from the overall timeline and calendars presented in-game, many theorists place Security Breach somewhere in the 2030s. So if we assume the Pizzaplex has only been open for at most 5 to 10 years, then the storyteller would have had to take place somewhere from 2025 to 2040, somewhere in that range, which would place this mysterious tragedy sometime in the 90s to early 2000s, which is technically possible depending on what you believe. It might not even be a huge issue. But then 10 years prior he builds the Mimic, which would be in the late 80s to early 90s, which again theoretically isn't an issue except for the fact that Secret of the Mimic gives us the date 1979. And the Help Wanted 2 update uses that code to give us the white tiger plushie, linking the white tiger to 1979, which would be 10 years before the range we have when Edwin would have been like 13. So let's flip the script, and we'll assume that the Mimic was made in 1979, and that's what these teasers mean. Well, that would mean that 40 years later, the Pizzaplex exists, which would be 2019, which is either 4 years after or 4 years before FNAF 3 takes place. And look, while I believe 4 years after FNAF 3 is unbelievably soon, it is technically possible, but I refuse to believe that Security Breach could take place before FNAF 3, and I'm not the only person saying this. I'm not the first person to say this. ID's Fantasy has for a long time brought this timeline up as a major issue with the Tales games theory, and she's spot on with that criticism. One of a few things needs to happen for any of this to make sense. Either the 1979 date has to have nothing to do with the Mimic, Mimic, which would be incredibly strange, especially to put it as the main date we get in Secret of the Mimic and relate it to the White Tiger plushie. Or the years that we've been getting from the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories are inaccurate at best, and we should just take the general story from Tales from the Pizzaplex and wait for details from the games themselves, which is unfortunately pretty annoying to do, but that's probably what I will end up doing. Because look, I'm not bringing this up to say that I've already changed my mind on the continuity of the Tales from the Pizzaplex short stories taking place within the game's timeline. I still think that mostly happens. But what I think this is likely telling us is that the details from these stories aren't really one-to-one, and it's more so the general ideas and the general storyline. Not to mention, Jackie is never once brought up in the books, and there's like 4 different stories specifically about the Mimic itself, so you'd think Jackie would show up or be mentioned once. But to put a bow on this, according to the books, a Tiger Rock animatronic did something so horrible, 30 years later, a dude seeing it from far away was sent into a PTSD panic attack. Will we learn what this is in Secret of the Mimic? I sure hope so, but it seems like that might be too early in the timeline to learn about the Tiger Rock animatronic. But the fact that we get the plushie in the Help Wanted 2 update seems to at least cue us in that Tiger Rock is going to be involved in some way. But at the end of all of this, if you're going to get any takeaways from this video, what is the Mimic? What do you need to know moving forward? At its core, a Mimic is anything with the Mimic 1 program as its prime directive. Said program's main course of action is to observe its environment and replicate what it's seen. That program is too unstable, not differentiating between good and bad things, just copying things. The iteration we're seeing right now in the games has likely been around for about 5 years, starting all the way back in Help Wanted, taking the form of Glitchtrap, an iteration of the Mimic 1 program that's been trained on the horrible deeds of the Fazbear franchise. We also know that the Mimic endoskeleton that has suffered the majority of the physical abuse is likely the endoskeleton we see at the end of Ruin, and that this Mimic 1 program is trying to recreate something horrible. At the end of the day, as always, we really don't know exactly what the Mimic is, in the same way that we don't know exactly what William Afton's deal is. Like, sure, we know William Afton's a purple guy who likes to kill kids and probably wants to seek immortality, but frankly, a lot of what we know about William Afton is speculation based off of books that don't really line up with the games that well. And that's starting to sound really familiar when you think about the Mimic. So I don't know why there's this whole thing about fans being like, I can't believe that FNAF is starting to rely so heavily on the books that you can't even know what the antagonist is without reading them. It's always been like that, I promise you. FNAF hasn't changed. You're getting tired of it. I'm sorry. But hopefully this video was helpful. Please let me know if it was in the comments below. Last year we got a teaser for by far my most anticipated game of 2025, but we didn't get any gameplay. Luckily though, a few days ago at the PlayStation State of Play, we got a full gameplay trailer and details. And it looks amazing, so I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. Today we are going to break down and fully analyze the trailer for Sonic Racing Crossworlds. Right away, some of the mechanics seem different, but similar to All Stars Racing's Transformed. And, alright, I get it. We're gonna talk about Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, of course we're going to, but I'll probably do a video on Sonic on the second channel in like a week or so. But like, this State of Play was made for me. Sonic, go-karts, and FNAF? My cup runneth over. Slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. I think the best way to go about this video is just go over the trailer in depth, frame by frame, shot by shot, and point out everything that seems important that you may have missed. But the like lore relevant points. I'm not gonna go into every shot and be like, there's a box, and another box, and this box looks like a cake. We're going over the stuff that seems lore relevant. So without any further ado, let's break down this trailer. Right away in the first shot, we get this blue van, which seems to be the same van from the Mimic update for Help Wanted 2. At least they're both blue and have a similar build, and the update was made to tease the upcoming game, so they're probably the same van. Though it is important to note the differences. The one in the trailer does not have a white stripe and has the Fazbear Entertainment logo, and the one in Help Wanted 2 does have a white stripe but doesn't have the Fazbear Entertainment logo. Regardless, the ending of the Help Wanted 6.2 update sees the van packing up the MXCS console and driving away, and in this trailer, we see the van pulling up to the facility. Considering the other thing in the room that it's driving away from is the facility, to me, this is telling us that one of the things we'll be bringing back from this factory is the MXES console, and if it's in this factory, it was likely made by Edwin. This is something many people have speculated, but we still don't know what the Mex's system actually does. Hopefully we'll find out in this game. Most of the narration is just flavor and describing that we're going to reclaim the Mimic for Fazbear, but the beginning of it has this line.
One of our contractors, Edwin Murray, has gone missing.
And I cannot tell you how monumental it is that we get a first name and a last name of a character in this series. Like, yes, is the name Edwin Murray really important because it establishes a connection to the books? Of course, but frankly, that's not even the hypest thing here. Think about it. When is the last time that we have directly from the games gotten a first and last name of a character? We haven't. Literally, we have not gotten a full name, frankly, any name, for Henry Emily, Charlotte Emily. We have not gotten a full name for William Afton, Michael Afton, Vanessa, or Gregory. That's all of our characters. The closest we've gotten is in sister location, we get Mr. Afton, and at the end of it, we get It's Me, Michael, so we can piece together Michael Afton, and in the credits for FNAF 6, we get the name William Afton. That is the most we've ever gotten in this entire series. So I think it's important to point out the fact that this trailer is willing to just straight up be Edwin Murray. That is so refreshing, because again, I love the cryptic nature of the lore of this game. It's why I have a job, but it is nice to just get some unambiguous information for once. But yeah, that in mind, the name Edwin Murray doubles down what I've been saying for the past couple months, that at this point, I think it is safe to assume that the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories are basically one-to-one with the games. Now, that still could be wrong, right? This could be a Silver Eye situation, where we have the names William Afton, Henry Emily, we have locations and animatronics and characters and concepts that do match, but the stories are different. That's totally possible with these new books, but until that's proven to be the case, I think it's a safe assumption to assume that these books are one-to-one, for the most part anyway, minor details aside. Anyway, let's go back to the trailer. We get our first shot inside of the factory, and there's a lot of characters in suits that we want to talk about here. I've talked about this before, mind the tea, I'm sick again if you couldn't tell, but hey, I wasn't sick for like 3 weeks straight. It was crazy. It was so nice. I've talked about this before on the channel, but this era of FNAF, if the 1979 date in the first teaser is to be believed, coincides with the Fall Fest, a mysterious era that we don't know much about from Fazbear's history. My belief is that the Fall Fest was this annual fair that they trialed characters at, and the most popular ones became mainstays at Freddy's locations. That's where we originally got Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy. They started as characters at Fall Fest, became very popular, and were made mainstays. Frankly, I could see the mediocre melodies being the runner-ups that were popular but not quite as popular. So that being said, Fall Fest, I believe, and I think this is showing us, had a lot of characters. Not all of them made it. Frankly, most of them didn't. And I think in this factory, and that gets doubled down by the description we'll get into later, we're going to see all of the characters that they've trialed. It's important to mention that many of these characters have been seen in the books already, like in Stories the Mimic and the epilogues. So I will be pointing out every character I can see in this trailer. And if that character has something pretty close in the books, I'll make sure to mention it, or at least display a book when talking about it. In this starting shot, we have a couple characters immediately. The lighting does make it tough to see colors though. I'm going to assume this is a yellow dog and some kind of blue dog, both of which are mentioned in the books. The yellow dog is actually something David wore and walked around on all fours, which makes sense with this suit. Then there's this bee character, which wasn't in any of the books, but was on one of the posters at Pax West. Moving further in, there's these cutouts for a pink sheep and a sleeping dog. The pink sheep might not be an important character, but instead a steel wool reference, as they like to do in the games. There's also this goose character that shows up a lot throughout the trailer, and on the shelf there's a head. This head is a bit hard to see, but luckily we see it again later, so we'll talk about it then. There's then a cutout of this balloon dog, and in the background there's a mascot of what seems to be another dog, or at least the face reminds me of Goofy, so it's giving dog, but it is hard to make out what it is. And then we get this monstrosity. This cutout of a jester is absolutely terrifying to me, but it's important. Several times in these stories, they mention a pink and yellow-green jester. There's two of them in the Mimic, and in the epilogues, there's actually a springlock suit of this character. That's an important suit because it's used to kill the Mimic in the epilogues. So if this is our jester, that implies we might actually finally get to see an in-game model of a springlock suit. Not like years after the fact, crumpled and barely usable or half-rotted, but an in-use, new Springlock suit, which would be massive. Our next scene is of this office. We turn on a generator to access the door, and inside there's a lot of details to go over. On the left side, there's a bulletin board with some children's drawings on it. In the books, Edwin Murray had a son named David, and I'm assuming he's the one that drew these, since the picture in the middle shows what looks like an adult and a child holding hands, likely Edwin and David. Off to the left, we see this mushroom character. He shows up a lot, and for good reason. I think this dude's awesome. I want a figure of him now. In fact, there's a figurine of the Mushroom Man on the desk. We also see this digital clock reading 12 o'clock, which could indicate a traditional FNAF gameplay section here, or maybe just the clocks in the facility show the current time throughout the game. There's this large center console that has the same triangle symbol that the puzzle in Help Wanted 2 had, likely being the logo of this whole facility, MCM. Off to the right side, there looks to be a helper console, but we'll go more over the helper console when we get its dedicated shot in the trailer. And believe me, I tried my best, but I cannot make out what's on this text. I zoomed in, I upped it to 4K, I tried contrasting it, I tried upping the exposure, I can't figure it out. If you can, let me know. Next, we get this panning shot of the different costumes, in which we get another shot of the blonde dog from the epilogues, this elephant, which isn't from the books, but is a non-deteriorated version of this costume from the basement in ruin, the one that's in the room the Mimic is held in. And then there's this creature. I guess this is the blue dog from earlier, but I'm gonna be so honest. When I look at this thing, I can't tell if it's a dog or a duck. Like, the snout and eyes are giving dog, but the snout is kind of shaped like a duckbill, and the coloration reminds me of a cartoon duck. Like, maybe I'm just crazy, but I wouldn't doubt if this thing is like Danny the Duck Dog, or maybe like a platypus? I don't know. It's weird. I do kind of like it though. The next shot is of Tiger Rock, but instead of the plushie we saw in Help Wanted 2, this is definitely the mascot suit. Look at how it's standing up. Honestly, I wouldn't doubt if this is the beginning of our first encounter with the Mimic. We walk into a dark room, then there's a spotlight on the Tiger Rock suit. The Tiger Rock chases us until eventually we see the Mimic inside. And looking at this in full form, I kind of suspect that the suit the Mimic was making in the basement is supposed to be the closest thing it can make to the Tiger Rock suit. At least that's the vibe I get. Our next shot is in this back room / interior wall sort of space, but we get a clean shot of the Mimic using Jackie to climb over the facility. Jackie being the center of the teaser was interesting, as it left a lot of us wondering if she's the main antagonist or really important to the lore. But looking at how Jackie is used by the Mimic in this trailer, I have a suspicion that Jackie is less the major antagonist and more so a suit the Mimic likes to use because it's incredibly agile, large, and able to climb on things. So it might just be the most mobile suit in the facility. There's also this cute mouse on a box, which is a tool we get later on. If I had to guess, it's like a distraction thing that you wind up and throw. Our next shot is of this hallway with posters and windows. I remember that the people who played the PAX demo mentioned a hallway similar to this, so I wouldn't doubt if this is that hallway. We can make out most of these posters. The last 3 of them are actually the Fredbear's posters from Security Breach, these 3 to be exact. The first one is a bit hard to make out, and we haven't seen it before, but it seems to be advertising some sort of salon with this dog character. And then, of course, we get the Mimic in that elephant costume at the end of the hallway. And holy hell, is it freaky. This is menacing in a way that FNAF really hasn't been for me in a while. This gives that FNAF 1 eeriness that I've been craving. Our next shot is again of the Mimic, showing us how useful Jackie is, using her to crawl through the vents to look for us. And what a terrifying shot of Jackie. Like, just look at this face. Next, we get a good close-up shot of the Mushroom Man, but with the Mimic in it. The important thing to note here is the new Mimic face. Look at these eyes. They're clearly different from the Mimic in Ruin, which is a good thing. The books mention that the Mimic can repair itself, and it's been changed several times, and we can see that here. Frankly, these eyes give me the vibes of a vintage light bulb with a coil inside, and I think that's what we're seeing, which lines up with the timeline of this game. We then get 2 different angles of this puzzle room, in an aerial view and up close and personal one. If I had to guess, this is one of those classic rotate the pipe kind of puzzles where we have to get an electrical current from one end to the other, and line up the wires by rotating these shapes. But frankly, this isn't important. That's cool, don't care. Here's the important thing. Take a look at that elephant. Specifically, what's behind it? That is a very small arm. So one of 2 possibilities are here. Either this is a very small mascot suit for some reason tucked away behind a larger mascot suit, or for the first time in Five Nights at Freddy's history, that is an on-screen dead body. We have never had gore outside of some eyeballs from FNAF 1 in a Five Nights at Freddy's game. The closest thing we've had are silhouettes in Sister Location and 8-bit minigames. And look, I'm not one of those people who insists that we need graphic content in FNAF to keep it interesting,
blood and guts and misery. No, but it is undeniably refreshing to get some more mature themes in these games. Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 showed just that you can up the ante a little bit, not lose your core audience, and show everybody that you're willing to play ball. And I hope that this body is a sign that FNAF is going to do the same. The next shot is this office with this fun little guy. Judging by his postman adjacent outfit and the little mail lever on his hat, I'm assuming this is an automatic letter sorter. In fact, the people who went to Pax West who played the demo mentioned seeing a room like this, where it's an office with this robot in the center of it, and if it is the same room, you come in here to turn on a generator, and as you're doing it, Jackie breaks in, brutalizes the guy, and chases you. I hope that's not true, because I wish nothing but the best for this silly little guy. He does kind of remind me of an early staff bot, though. Don't know if that's important or not. As far as the rest of this shot, there's nothing that's important that you can make out. All the documents appear blank on the trailer. In the next shot, we're opening some kind of gate. Once again, in the PAX demo, players mentioned having to collect a crank to open this gate. Where they got the crank is interesting though, and lining it up with the teaser, this is definitely the same one. This crank is taken off of Jackie's box and used to access the grate, but doing that activates Jackie and starts a chase sequence. We then get peak walking animation with this mushroom guy. Again, I love this man, and I would do anything for him. We then get another shot of Tiger Rock, and there's not much to talk about here, but it is cool. But then we get this shot of the helper console. Now, on one side of the screen, we actually get a better look at that B character, plus what seems to be a scene of pirate animals, notably a crab and I believe a shark. It's interesting that it's a whole pirate scene without Foxy. I wonder if Foxy originated in this character set, but the big thing here to talk about is Helper, an early version of Helpy in this terminal, which begs the question, how long was Helpy in the franchise? Because at this point, Helpy seems to predate Freddy, which is crazy. Not to mention the early Faz wrench being used to access the terminal, with what looks like 3 symbols to measure something on it, and this terminal seems to activate a welcome show. Who knows what that could be? We then get this animatronic in Dolly, a human character who seems to be some sort of doctor slash dentist slash nurse. I say that judging based on what she's wearing, but she is freaky, and I think she might be able to shoot something out of her hands, judging by the weird backpack she's wearing that has tubing connecting to her forearms. Now, to be fair, this could be something that shoots out, but this could also just be hydraulic power. Like, this might just be how the animatronic moves, since this is supposed to be older technology. But we know how technology and timelines never really lines up in FNAF. This is also the shot where we get a better look at that head from the beginning. To me, this looks like it might be an early concept of the cupcake, but frankly, it's too hard to tell. It's just kind of something right now. We then get this massive storage room shot with a lot of interesting stuff. During it, we're using that mouse from earlier, and again, I think it's just a distraction. On the very far right, we have a pig character who probably isn't VIP, but he might be an early VIP, and then again, we get that B character. And then there's something that, look, I might be looking too far into this, but I swear, does this kind of look like a Fredbear face? Like, imagine if Fredbear and them were one of those old style of animatronics with the fur lining and the plastic face. Doesn't this look like that face, or am I crazy? Or maybe that's early Freddy? We then see the security door, which might be the office from earlier. After all, the generator is in the same location, and that office being a security office does make a lot of sense. We get plenty more geese characters, and then this cutout of a crocodile. He was on one of the PAX posters that we got pictures of, but I have a feeling it might be an early version of Monty. I mean, they're both crocodiles, it's not a huge stretch. The next shot is then of Jackie, breaking the ceiling we're under, and we get a good shot of her backside, showing that she does in fact rip herself out of the box, as people mentioned in the demo at PAX. And finally, the trailer ends on this reveal of a massive old-timey Music Man. Some people have said Disco Music Man, but to me, looking at it, this looks like a carnival barker, which if all of this is circus themed, would make sense for Music Man to be this massive carnival barker. I mean, he's got the top hat, the big mustache, what looks like a vest, but notably, look at his mouth. His mouth is a music box. Those like rotating things with the bumps that hit keys. His teeth are the keys. This is such a cool detail. The trailer then ends with some more film grain and giving us the date June 13th, 2025, Friday the 13th. Also, there's like a 1-frame shot of the Tiger Rock plushie, not sure why. And that's the trailer, but that's not all that we got, because on the PlayStation Store, there's now a wish list page for Secret of the Mimic, and in it is a full description of the game. So I'm just gonna replay the trailer while I read it to you verbatim. Enter the abandoned workshop of Murray's Costume Manor and unravel the mystery left behind by the reclusive inventor, Edwin Murray. In Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, you'll step into a world where every dark corner holds a secret, and every flicker of light hints at an ever-present threat. The Mimic, a prototype endoskeleton, can adapt to any costume and become any character, including what you fear most. Armed with only your wits, a few gadgets, and a heavily redacted corporate briefing, you'll attempt to retrieve Fazbear's prized prototype technology while grappling with cryptic clues and a relentless shadow determined to dispatch all unwanted company. Prepare for heart-pounding thrills as you explore the labyrinth of the deserted costume manor, discovering remnants of Edwin's unfinished work and eluding the monster he's created. Experience Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic and survive the mystery and madness. Secret of the Mimic will be available for the PlayStation 5 on June 13th, 2025. And I do want to be clear here, it only mentions the PS5, but let's be real. Every time that a FNAF game has been announced via a Sony platform like the PlayStation Store or the State of Play, they only mention the PlayStation. Every time that's happened, it's released at the same exact time on PC on Steam. So I think it is going to be on PC as well. However, there is a chance it won't be on PS4, and if so, that's rough for the PS4 only players out there. I wish you the best. And that was the trailer. So let's go over some of the surface level lore and speculation that we can, and leave some of the crazy stuff for next time. Right away, we get a company name in Murray's Costume Manor, and I feel like that's pretty much a lock for what MCM stands for from Help Wanted 2, the letters we see on the logo that's all over that facility. And if the point of this place is that Murray was contracted by Fazbear to make them costumes, Murray's Costume Manor makes a lot of sense, which means finally we will be getting the perfect environment for the Mimic to shine in. The Mimic as a character is terrifying because it can be in any costume, so putting us in a massive factory filled with empty costumes means you're never really safe, and that's why it works so well. As far as what will be going on during the game, I think it's safe to say that we are Team C at least. For those of you who don't know what that means, the second half of the story, The Mimic, follows a team of engineers that Fazbear sent to collect whatever Edwin was working on because he went MIA. Basically the same thing that we hear in this trailer. But that team discovers that they're not the first ones, that there was in fact a team that was sent before them, who found half of an endoskeleton and gave it legs and repaired it. But once they did, it began killing them. It is the Mimic. And in finding that out, they also die. So if we're by ourselves, we're neither of those groups, and the Mimic's already walking around, so we definitely can't be the first one. So I think, after all of this, Fazbear started sending single engineers, and that's who we're going to be. But there is a massive question here. If we're going through Edwin's factory and trying to retrieve any technology we can find, why was the Help Wanted 2 teaser showing us the mansion in front? Unless they're literally connected, but in the story, it was a separate mansion next to the factory. So either they're one large building, or this game is going over multiple locations. One where Edwin planned to live before his wife died, and the factory he lived in while working. And finally, I have a guess for what the Secret of the Mimic actually is, because I think it's a literal title. I don't think we're here to find out what made the Mimic go evil, or what's going to happen in this game is what the Secret of the Mimic is, that it was killing Fazbear employees. I think it's much more simple than that. Fazbear sent us here to get the technology Edwin was working on, and while the prototype endoskeleton is impressive, the main thing they want is that programming. The program that can see something and learn it. You'll never have to program an animatronic again. Put that in everything you make, and they can just watch you dance and dance for you. That's what Fazbear wants. Fazbear wants to know how the Mimic works. Fazbear wants to know what makes the Mimic tick. Fazbear wants to know what is the secret of the Mimic. I think that's what the title is telling us. The title is what we're looking for. What is the programming? The Mimic 1 program is the secret of the Mimic, and that's what we're there to collect. But that's just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours in the comments below about this trailer. Regardless, it looks amazing, and I can't wait to play it. You know we'll be live playing it. After all, I do live stream 4 days a week at 9 p.m. EST on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on the second channel Right Tuesday and on Twitch at RightTuesYT. Secret of the Mimic is coming out in a few months, and the trailer we just got for it is already blowing up pieces of the lore. I made a whole trailer breakdown for it right here, but this didn't really fit in that video. This being what that game is going to say for the books versus games canonicity debate. Characters like the Mimic and Edwin Murray seem to be confirming that the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are one-to-one with the game's timeline, and I think they are. But already, just with this trailer, there are some issues that put that up to question, and we need to talk about it, because if what I'm worried could be happening is happening, Secret of the Mimic might have FNAF's biggest retcon in history. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. And yes, I fought with it for like half a year at this point. The mic is going to be right up at my face again because it just sounds bad. best. That way, I know I'm like the only person that cares about how the microphone sounds, but I care about how the microphone sounds. Let's start with what the trailer is establishing. Just from the voiceover alone, we know that Edwin Murray was contracted by Fazbear to make the Mimic, an endoskeleton that can wear any suit and learn just from observing its environment. And note, this is what I'm saying Fazbear Entertainment themselves are saying. So yes, any truth they tell us is up to speculation since Fazbear lies a lot. Moving on, we don't actually see any Fazbear characters in the trailer except for possibly this early version of DJ Music Man. And like, he becomes a Fazbear character, but is he at this point? It's hard to tell. Regardless, that does make sense because in the first trailer, we get the year 1979. And at the Pax West booth, we got this poster, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza coming soon. So this building exists before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza ever opened. So obviously there aren't Freddy's characters yet. So that being said, let's compare that information with what we know about this story from the books. In the story The Mimic, Edwin is contracted by Fazbear to turn costumes into robotic replicas. We get direct mentions of a yellow chicken with metal feathers on her head, this one obviously being Chica. And while he does make the Mimic in this story, he does it for the sole purpose of entertaining his kid David. He doesn't do it for Fazbear, even though they reclaim it later when they collect all of his assets. He makes it specifically to play with and babysit his son David because he doesn't want to be a good dad. It's also noteworthy that he owns a factory and nearby mansion, but him and David live full-time in the factory that's filled with several different costumes. So putting the Secret of the Mimic trailer up against the story The Mimic from the books, a lot of things seem to line up fairly one-to-one. The location being this large factory, the names of these characters and what they create, not just the Mimic but the other costumes in the factory too. Several characters mentioned in this factory show up in the trailer, like the yellow dog, the pink and yellow green jester, the mushroom man, and more. All of those are direct references to the books. The only thing that doesn't seem to line up one for one is why the Mimic was created in the first place. Like I mentioned, in the books, although Fazbear does eventually claim the Mimic when seizing all of Edwin's assets, they didn't contract him to make the Mimic. They only contracted Edwin to make these robotic replicas. He made the Mimic because he didn't want to watch his kid. But remember that I pointed out that Fazbear Entertainment is the ones telling us that Edwin made the Mimic for Fazbear's. So they could just be lying at that point. In the story The Mimic, the engineers that were sent to collect the stuff Edwin was working on weren't told about the Mimic. The first team happened upon it and repaired it, and it killed them, and the second team came upon the repaired one and it killed them. So all of this can be very easily alleviated if we just assume that Fazbear's started getting more and more dead engineers not coming back, learned about the Mimic, and then started warning engineers ahead of time, being like, oh yeah, and he made this Mimic for us, get that while you're there. It's dangerous though, so be careful. So then everything's good, right? Like I said in the title and the thumbnail and the intro that this game could have the biggest retcon in FNAF's history ever of all time. And so far, everything's good. If Fazbear is lying, then there's no issues. Edwin was contracted to make the Freddy Fazbear Pizza animatronics, and he also made the Mimic, and when he goes missing, Fazbear sends engineers to collect everything. So when we play Secret of the Mimic, we'll be collecting the Freddy Fazbear's animatronics and the Mimic. If that's right, that's the retcon. That's the big issue. At least, according to FNAF 6, it is. FNAF 6, or the full legal Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, had one of the best endings in the entire franchise, with the Henry monologue at the end of the completion ending. The one that goes,
Connection terminated.
And basically half of the FNAF fandom just started reciting the rest of the monologue. And it's cool, but it does overshadow the other Henry monologue in that game from the Insanity ending. Granted, it's way weirder to get the Insanity ending, arguably easier because you just need to buy one thing, but you have to buy Egg Baby of all things, and then in the night gameplay you have to hold the button to get the Insanity. It's a weird ending, but it provides us another Henry monologue, one where he's contemplating everything that's happened so far and lamenting his role in it, and he says this line.
Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose.
He describes the current situation as the missing child incident victims being trapped in prisons of his making. So if he made the prisons that the missing child incident victims are in, then one of two options is possible here. Either he killed the missing child incident victims and stuffed them into the suits, ergo putting them into the prisons, or he built the prisons themselves, the Freddy's animatronics, the original Freddy Fazbear Pizza cast. We also know from the Silver Eyes that Henry was a technological genius, and behind most of the innovation at Fazbear's. So putting all these facts together, many fans assumed this was confirmation that Henry built the original Fazbear animatronics, and William was the one who killed the kids, stuffed them into the suits, and ruined everything. And therein lies the issue with the inclusion of Edwin Murray. If Secret of the Mimic is going to come out and tell us that actually Edwin Murray built the original Fazbear animatronics and Henry didn't, then this line would no longer make any sense. After all, we know for certain that William killed the kids. So what prisons did Henry make? Not only that, but if Henry never made the animatronics, what is his point in the story? Because then he's like just some guy who owns part of the company. But if Edwin didn't make the Freddy's animatronics and Henry did, then the books can't be fully canon to the games. The details aren't exactly one-to-one. So what's the answer here? Well, in trying to figure that out, I came up with what I think are fairly reasonable predictions with how they're going to square all this away. One of them I think is less likely, and the other two I think are equally likely, but I believe one more than the other. So let's start with the least likely option that is still plausible, and that's Help Wanted. For those of you who don't remember, Help Wanted introduced two very important things at the same time. Through direct quotes and implied inclusions of animatronics, Help Wanted established that FNAF 1 through 6 are in-universe games, and that Fazbear claims an indie dev made them to smear the name of Fazbear Entertainment, and they're all false. However, at the same time, Help Wanted clarifies via Tape Girl that Fazbear themselves hired the indie dev, and all of the games are describing real and true events that happened. These things did actually happen, but Fazbear is trying to use this to muddy the stories and cover everything up. If the missing child incident happened, that would be a big news story, but it's also 5 murders that happened in a small town in Utah. It probably wouldn't be that big of a story nationally or worldwide. So wait 20, 30, 40, 50 years when we get closer to the 2020s and 2030s, and you release video games restating all of this stuff. Now, if you hear about Fazbear Entertainment missing child incident and you go to Google that, you don't get the news articles from the 1980s, you get the recent results, the fan wikis of FNAF 1, and they muddy the water. And now, if you try to be like, oh, well, did you know like these games are talking about real things that happened? People will look at you and go, you're crazy. That's insane. I bring this up because a lot of the time when I mention that Help Wanted establishes that FNAF 1 through 6 are in-universe games, some people hear, oh, so nothing before Help Wanted matters anymore. And that's not true. All that this does is tell us that the games do describe real events, but they are made by an unreliable narrator. And I'm trying to say that that is Scott and Steelwool basically being like, look, those old games are great and they do correctly describe the majority of the FNAF lore, but they are not fully accurate. So if there are minor retcons moving forward, trust the newer games first. It's basically Scott and Steelwool being like, we want to keep telling this story and want to go back and showcase these things, but like if Toy Chica has the wrong amount of toes, don't blow up and assume it's a new character. We're just adjusting things as we go along. So the first plausible explanation for Edwin and Henry making the same animatronics is that this is a Help Wanted retcon. This is, sure, the game said it was Henry, but in reality, it was Edwin Murray. Now, I think this is the least likely option, because this is that massive retcon I talked about, and I don't think that this serves the story enough to be warranted, or it's something that would want to be changed. It seems like way bigger of a retcon than Help Wanted is asking us to allow. So if I don't think it's this possibility, what about the other two that I do think are way more likely? Well, we'll start with the one that I don't personally believe, but I think is very likely. Option 2. Secret of the Mimic is going to show us that the Tales from the Pizzaplex games are not fully accurate to the game's timeline, but instead will give us plenty of evidence to assume that this is a Silver Eyes situation. Essentially, the characters, places, and things carry over, but the details and the plot lines are different. Think about the Silver Eyes. We have William Afton, Henry Emily, Fazbear's, all of these things, but in the books, Henry makes a robotic version of Charlotte Emily after she dies and artificially ages it up until eventually she is the one who kills William Afton, and that definitely does not happen in the games. Similarly, Secret of the Mimic could be trying to tell us that yes, Edwin Murray, David, they all exist, and the creation of the Mimic is pretty much the same as it is in the books, but some of those details tales are different. He didn't make the initial Fazbear animatronics. The other tales in the Pizzaplex stories are slightly different than the games, etc, etc. This would also explain why Fazbear says that Edwin made the mimic for them. He didn't in the books, but the games would then be different from the books. And I think that is a very likely possibility here, but it's not the one I think we're going to see in June, because I believe most strongly in option number 3, that the books are fully connected to the games, but Edwin never finished the job. As far as I'm aware, in the books, we never see Edwin fully finish the commission from Fazbear Entertainment. His son David died because he was a bad father and left the door unlocked. So when his ball rolled out, David was like, "Where is my ball?" Ran out on the road and there was a car. How many times am I gonna reference that damn song? Anyway, David dies before Edwin finishes the commission from Fazbear, and we don't get to see what happens to Edwin after that. He kind of just goes into a grief spiral, beats up the mimic, and then we cut to way in the future. But the fact that Fazbear is sending engineers to collect whatever Edwin had been working on, to me says that he didn't finish the job, or at least never submitted a finished product. So it's totally possible that both in the books and the games timeline, Edwin was initially commissioned to create the Freddy Fazbear Pizza animatronics, but David died before he was able to finish the job and he quit entirely, and then they had to turn to Henry to create them, allowing them both to be hired to build them, but only Henry finishes it. But to be fair, I do see one issue with this theory, because it feels like it fits perfectly and answers this issue, but if Henry could have originally built the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza animatronics in the first place, why would they have ever commissioned a third party to do it? Like, if Henry had this capability, why didn't he build them from the start? My best guess is this leans on the whole publicly traded company theory I've been purporting for a while now, that Fredbear's Family Diner is a private company only owned by Henry and William, and when they opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they opened it under a new public company, Fazbear Entertainment, a public company that's beholden to shareholders and investors. And the only explanation I could think of is that those shareholders and investors wanted to prove that Henry and William weren't necessary to the creation of this restaurant, and therefore contracted an outside engineer to create the animatronics. And then when that failed, they just went, "Fine, Henry, you can make them, but just don't put your name over everything." Other than that, I can't think of a single good reason why, if Henry could make them, they'd go to Edwin in the first place. Once again, we don't have enough information to definitively settle book versus games until at least Secret of the Mimic comes out. And there's a good chance it'll come out and we still can't settle this debate. But I'd love to hear where you land on it in the comments below, because if we see Edwin Murray made the original Freddy's animatronics, then every timeline is going to be deeply changed. But we'll have to wait till June to find that out. And I know I'll be streaming it day one on this channel, because after all, I live stream 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at 9 p.m. EST. And you should go ahead and click the card on the top right to follow my Twitch page. In the meantime, if you need a break from deep diving onto FNAF lore, last week I made a theory on a game whose lore isn't so convoluted, Poppy Playtime, and I'm really confident in it. You can find that right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty slices.